Hey guys, I have a couple catchphrases I use all the time, like in person and on this channel, and they just kind of rolled off the tongue naturally, and I always say them. Um, I did have one that a family member I had just met. He married my niece, great guy from Jersey. Um, he came down on vacation and had just interviewed exorcist priest Father Vincent Lampart, and I was telling him how this guy, you would think these guys would be like these deep, intense guys, and he was so full of joy. And he said, after his exorcism, he usually goes and has an ice cream cone, and he's like, wow, that's interesting. Why would he do that? I'm like, the guy's like, hey, can't let the devil steal your joy. And he's like, that's a great catchphrase. You should use it at the end of every video. So out of respect for him, because I like the guy, and I do believe that. That's a great phrase. I tried saying it a couple times, but it just wasn't natural. My natural one I always say is stay Catholic. I always, when I meet someone, like, yo, what's up? And then when I see them, later, stay Catholic, keep the faith, stay Catholic. And speaking of Vincent Lampart, it reminded me of what an awesome priest he is. He said when he announces he's going to give a talk on the devil, he'll get like 2,000 people in an auditorium. When he says he's going to talk about God, he gets about 20. But in this book, Exorcism by him, it's called Exorcism, The Battle Against Satan and His Demons by Father Vincent Lampart. He's a phenomenal priest. I mean, his teachings about God, like just spiritual growth and holiness. I had a Protestant family member read it, and she was like, wow, that was a great book. And I thought of that when I thought of this video this morning, because actually someone emailed me and asked me a question, and I was kind of running late for work. I'm like, yeah, I'm not gonna be able to do a video today. And I look at the time, I'm like, I could do a quick one. so, and I thought of him, and I was like, I gotta read that book again. That's definitely one of these books you can read over and over again, because he gives you so many spiritual truths. And he had agreed to come back on because when we filmed it, I was like young in this YouTube thing, and I didn't realize there were certain rooms in my house, the internet was terrible. Or, at the time I was thinking this was spiritual. It could be either one, it could be both, I don't know. But in the video, when I was doing the video, I couldn't tell, but my face was so distorted. So it's like right off the bat, my one son called me, he's like, he just looked at the numbers, like, Dad, you got like 600 views in a minute. It was like, this thing's gonna be your biggest video ever. You're gonna get, at this rate, you're gonna get over 1 million views. And then my other son called me, goes, Dad, did you watch the video? And I said, no. What do you mean? He said, Dad, you need to take down the video. I go, why? He goes, did you watch it? I'm like, why would I watch it? I just did it. He's like, dude, you need to watch it. And I watched it. My face was like, and it was like so weird. So I had, long story short, I took it down, and I had all the professional people I know on YouTube, that I've interviewed. I emailed, see if they could help. Everybody tried to help. There was no help, and I kept the video down. He agreed to do another one, and he was really busy. So we haven't done that other one. Hopefully, Lord willing, we'll be able to get together again and do it. But then finally, I just posted it. And so, so it's kind of weird, but I posted it because you could hear what he was saying, and what he said was so valuable. I figured you guys needed to hear it. But one of the times I called him or emailed him, I forget, and I said, I think I called him, and I said, hey, you think you could do this at this date? He goes, no, I'm going up to New York. I'm meeting this expert. This guy's like the foremost expert on the occult and exorcism, Dr. Richard Gallagher. And I'm like, So I got the guy, I looked the guy up, I emailed him, and he agreed to come on. And this is his book. I got his book too while I was waiting for the interview, Demonic Foes by Dr. Richard Gallagher. Very interesting. I highly recommend this book as well. And we actually became good friends. I mean, I had him on Blue Collar and a Scholar. This guy's like an Ivy League degree. He's an Ivy, actually trains but he's a professor, and he was trained, like his internship was at Yale University, and he was before he became an exorcist consultant, I guess you would call it. He was like considered like one of the most elite psychiatrists, so medical doctor, not just a psychologist who's just a mental health expert. So really, really brilliant guy. So I had him on Blue Collar and a Scholar, and we used to talk on the phone all the time. And he said, it would be a great idea if me and you teamed up and debated a couple atheists. And I was like, yeah, I would love to do that. So I contacted a couple there's like a big atheist channel on YouTube. I forget their name. And like they're two top guys. I said, hey, we'll have like a team debate. My son will moderate it. And they agreed. And at the last minute, the one guy had to pull out. So I said, how would you guys like to just debate each other, and I'll be the moderator? And so we did that, and we had some other plans, and I just, with work, it's so hard. I have a lot of people contact me that I generally like, and I think we can do, things for the glory of God, and, just life gets in the way sometimes, but I plan on having him back too, Dr. Richard Gallagher. But anyway, getting back to the original point I was trying to make, my natural catchphrase I always use, stay Catholic. I always, at the end, usually just end, and it's not something scripted, nothing scripted, if you didn't notice. But one time when I interviewed someone years ago, he was surprised. He said, so when will you post this? Because I had interviewed him, he had interviewed me, and he said, yours will be posted in like 2 months. I'm like, really? He's like, when will you post? Mine will be the one, when I interview you, this interview will be posted in like 2 months, he said. I got to edit, I got to do this, that, the whole process, he said. He goes, when's yours going to be posted? Because we interviewed each other back to back, like right off the same day. And I said, in about 20 minutes. And he's like, what? I said, brother, I host it, I post it, and I Holy Ghost it. And he laughed. I said, honestly, afterwards, I just post it. I don't review it. I just post it, bro. I don't edit it. And I just pray, Lord, let your will be done. Let the people who need to hear this. And it's nothing like I'm this deep spiritual guy. It's just that I'm a low technical savvy guy. And, I have my sons over help me with the interview. I'm not going to have them spend their times. All my sons have 3 or 4 kids. My daughter has 1. But my sons all have at least 3 kids. And so, they work, they go to school. I'm not going to have them do my edits too. So this is how we do it. But unfortunately, sometimes I misspeak. People misunderstand what I'm saying. If it's something really blatant, like the other day I called Saint Padre Pio, Pope Padre Pio, because I was talking about Pope St. Pius X, and how they both said, you have to be holy, you can't descend from the Pope. That was like the topic of the video. So I had that on my mind. So if afterwards I remember, crap, I said that, I'll put in the notes. Or I might listen while I'm driving to work and say, yep, I did say that, and I'll put it in the notes, hey, this is what I meant. But I realized the other day when I was talking about avoiding Babylon and what Anthony from there had said, he had like put in a comment, yeah, maybe I shouldn't have said it that way. If you like, I could clarify it. And then he made a video the following day in response to my response to his response. And then I actually made a response to that response to my response to his response. But in the comment section, he was real charitable. He said, hey, I really like your channel. He's really, seems like a really nice guy. And he said, maybe I shouldn't have said it that way. If you want, I could clarify it. And like I said, he clarified it, but I still disagree. He said it a little bit different, but he clarified it, but I still disagree. And brothers can disagree. It's we're grown men. We're not little kids. But getting back to the point, I jokingly said on my response video to his response video to my response video, I jokingly said, yeah, I'll let you clarify it give you the benefit of the doubt like you do when we misunderstand Pope Francis. It was a joke because, Pope Francis would say something and there was a group, and I'm not going to start name calling, but the guys, the usual suspects. Whatever Pope Francis said, they always went to the extreme worst possible thing he could have meant. And then guys like me who said, no, that's not what he meant, they would name call us papists, Pope splainers, whatever, the normies, whatever, all the names these guys call us. And I realized, man, if people just took what I said or what he said, like his big thing, he said, every post-conciliar pope, so every pope after Vatican II is ashamed of Jesus Christ. Now imagine if Pope Francis said that, or Pope Francis said every pope before Vatican II was ashamed of Jesus Christ. Would anybody give him a moment to clarify it? Probably not. So it's just something to think about. If I'm just a regular blue collar guy and talk off the cuff and I say things people misunderstood, and Anthony, just a regular blue collar guy, says things off the cuff, joking with his buddies, people misunderstand him. Imagine a guy that don't speak our language on the other side of the world, who hasn't watched TV, social media, nothing, on video, because he made this vow to our Blessed Mother Mary in, I think, 1989. He's in his 80s, so there's a lot of differences, Imagine how many of us misunderstood him. And, another guest I had a couple times on Blue Collar and Scholar, Father Joseph Iannuzzi. He's a church theologian, and his job, I guess like authorized by the church, is to look at Pope statements and make sure, explain it to the layman, And he says, he understands why people misunderstood Pope Francis a lot, but every document he read, and he could break down all of them, the big controversial ones, and show you it's in continuity with church tradition. Nothing Pope Francis has said, written, or done was heretical. But he admits some of it was hard to understand, especially for certain types of guys that like the precision of theologians. Because he said, Pope Benedict was like the greatest theologian of the church. Pope St. John Paul was also a theologian. Pope Francis did not have a doctorate in theology. He was not a theologian. Before he was Pope, he was a bouncer at a bar. He talks like a blue collar guy, like he talks off the cuff. So I was able to give him the benefit of the doubt and look until I waited and see exactly what these theologians said he said, and the clarifications. I'm like, yeah, that's what I thought, But many people couldn't. And Father Iannuzzi said something really enlightening. He said he thinks the greatest gift Pope Leo is going to give the church is to clarify and bring to completion the teachings of Pope Francis, because he's a theologian, so he's going to say things precise. Guys like us, guys like me, I don't say things precise, And I'm married to a woman who likes precise things, and she gets confused at what I'm saying a lot too. She's like, well, what do you mean? She's very precise, her temperament. I talked about temperaments with, Avoiding Babylon, and Nick said, wow, this guy's psychoanalyzing you guys. So, but, another thing I want to say, a lot of people were commenting about my breathing. Sometimes the phone really picks it up, sometimes it doesn't. And like I said, I don't edit these things, so if I'm breathing heavy, the phone's going to pick it up. And I was saying, I think it might be my blood pressure, it might be this, that. And speaking of my wife, she never watches YouTube. Like, she's never on her phone. Like, I was saying to someone the other day, I don't want to give him away because I don't want his wife getting mad at him. I was saying to someone, a younger guy, I said, man, whenever I call home, it always goes to voicemail, and I got to wait for hours to get a call back. It's kind of annoying. My wife is never by her phone, never, her phone is never near her. And he's like, man, my wife is always glued to the phone 24/7. You want to switch? I would rather have your situation. And it's not that and she's always been this way when the kids, all our kids are grown with kids of their own, but when my kids were little, she hated talking on the regular, the house phone. We had one of those house phones, where you dial, and she hated that. Like, she had some girlfriends that liked the yap, and and she just wouldn't pick up if she, thought it was them. And that's why she, we were all excited with the invention of answer machines. Remember answer machines? You see the thing beeping, like, oh, I wonder who called. I'd be all excited. She'd be annoyed. Oh man, who's calling now? But she screened all her calls. She was just too busy. She, when she heard that Bible verse that women should stay busy at home and not be busybodies, she didn't hear her twice. She was always busy at home, homeschooling, cooking, baking, decorating. Like she was a beast. A beast mom. She was the bomb mom, and even now our kids are grown, and we both got the empty nest syndrome. Me, we deal with it different. I just always want to go to the kid's house or have them here, and she just wants to nurture something here. So we have 2 dogs, 2 cats, 2 birds, and 4 chickens. And I think the last time I seen her on YouTube was when my sons were building a chicken run for the chickens in the backyard, because we're allowed to have backyard chickens where I live. And she was looking at different styles of chicken runs and chicken coops to show my sons, and they built her a nice, my one son's a carpenter, and the other guys, they're all more mechanically inclined than me. I'm a talker. These guys are like the introverts and they get things done. But so anyway, I'm making this point because she doesn't even watch my YouTube videos. So she doesn't have no idea what's going on with my YouTube. I leave my work at work, I leave my YouTube at YouTube, and when I'm with her, she's the center of my attention. So we were talking about an incident. Someone was telling us how they were saying someone is having bad luck because they must have sin in their life, and we're like, no, this is a good guy. I know this guy's a good Christian guy. Like, bad things happen to good people. Just look at Job. God allows things to happen for people to grow in holiness. That's like a Protestant word of faith mentality, and to the worst extreme. My friend John, a Catholic redneck, experienced it. And I hope you don't mind me talking about this, but I don't think he would. He was a prosperity preacher. He actually was a name it and claim it word of faith preacher. And his 12-year-old daughter, his little princess, just died unexpected. No sickness, no nothing, just boom, aneurysm. He was devastated. He was broken. I don't know how you recover from this without God. And instead of his prosperity preacher friends comforted him, they were like Job's friends. And they said, this is caused by sin. You need to repent of sin. And the sin that usually does this is adultery. So the rumor around his church that he was in adultery. And he's still married to the same woman. I think he's like me, he's been married like 40 years. So that's like a sick, evil teaching. Yeah, do you reap what you sow? Yeah, if you're going to drink alcohol, you might get liver cancer. You're going to smoke cigarettes and cigars, you might get lung cancer. You reap what you sow. But it's not like God's punishing you. I'm going to take your daughter because you did this sin. And so I said, yeah. So we had talked about that the day before. I said, yeah, remember we were talking about, I said I did a video, how, sometimes I breathe heavy when I'm talking. And she said, yeah, that's because of your thing with your nose. And I'm like, yeah, I think you're right. And she said, plus you get excited and you just talk so fast, I don't think your breath can catch up to your mind. And I said, yeah, so my nose thing is I have one nostril that's always closed, like 100% of the time. And now the other one opens and closes periodically. And then sometimes it closes and I'm talking. So I'm talking so fast and so passionate, I'm not getting any breath. So, I could come on here with a nose strip. I actually sleep with nose strips because if not, I'll wake up in the night not breathing because my mouth is closed and then my nose closes. So I don't care. It looks a little silly, but I wore them to, train in Muay Thai, a few times to see if it would help my breathing, and it did. But those things are so darn expensive. I'm going to just save them for a night. But if it gets real bad, maybe I'll put it on So if you see me with a nose strip, that's what it is. So I think that's it. Usually nothing in life is one thing. It's always a combination, but I think that's like the main culprit, my nose. So if you hear me breathing. So I said to her, I said, yeah, how I breathe heavy sometimes. Someone said it's because I got sin in my life. I'm lying about what I'm saying. You know, I'm getting paid. One guy said one time, way back, I'm getting paid by the Vatican. Another guy said I'm lying about what I'm saying. So anyway, I thought that was funny. And so the reason I wanted to make this video is, you know, we need to give grace. We receive grace. God forgives us. We need to give grace to other people. You know, maybe we misunderstand them. You know, like think, okay. And my big thing is the temperament, the 4 basic temperaments that Hippocrates discovered. You know, we all have 4 basic temperaments. And if you learn that, it's easier to understand people and not be mad at people. Oh, that's just his temperament. You know, and it's no excuse for sin. And it's no excuse to have those weaknesses, because every temperament has a bunch of weaknesses, but they have a bunch of strengths. And usually opposites attract, because, you know, the person you're attracted to has strengths you don't have. You know, like in a marriage, you know, me and my wife have completely opposite temperaments. So she admired my strengths, I admired her strengths. We got married, and then all we noticed was each other's weaknesses. And you have to work through that. But in the same way with friendship and on YouTube, when you listen to people and you listen to bishops and popes, like, okay, this is personality type, whatever. And it kind of reminded me when I was young, growing up in Irvington and Newark. You know, I was born in Newark, and then when I got older, we moved to Irvington, right across the street, basically. And in Irvington, the bars closed at 2. In Newark, the bars closed at 3. So you would, at 2 o'clock, you'd walk across the street and you can go to another bar. But then at 3, the Italian club would open their bars. We call them after-hour clubs. And the Italian club, to be a member, you didn't have to be a member. They had to let you in. So you would literally have to knock on the door, and the bouncer would open up like a little thing in the glass and look at you. And if he thought you look cool, he would let you in. And I felt pretty cool. 17, I was getting in. I mean, back then the age was 18 to drink. And honestly, I was getting served since I was 14. You know, I learned very early. You know, I looked older. You know, the Italian side of me made me very hairy when being hairy was cool. I had a mustache. But also, I understood how you carried yourself. So, you know, I could read the room at an early age, and I'd walk in, and, you know, someone had a Yankee shirt, I'd talk baseball. Someone had a Giant shirt, I'd talk football, you know, whatever. And, you know, I was getting served everywhere at 14, you know, getting alcohol. And so I remember, you know, I was thinking I was really cool, bringing my friends into these after-hour bars. And I remember the one we used to go to in Newark, the bouncer was this big Italian kid. And he'd walk in, I'm like, hey, how you doing? And he'd see me every weekend, and he'd be like, and I knew he liked me because everybody else would be like, hello, and he'd be like, just give him a hard look. And I'll tell you a funny story there, and then I'll get to my point I'm making about this club. I remember once, you had to know how to handle yourself. You had to show respect to everybody in there. It was all about respect, and everybody respected you, you know. There's no trouble in that bar. Like I used to go to these biker bars and get in fights like every time, like fights like you see on TV, like 20 guys just throwing beer bottles at each other and punching each other. And actually went there for that purpose because me and my friends thought that was fun. But this bar, you don't get into a fight. You just mind your manners and be very respectful. And I remember one time this young guy, looked like he was in his early 20s, was playing pinball. And this older guy in a nice suit went up to him and said, hey, it's my turn. And the guy's like, hey, wait your turn, man. I got, these quarters are mine. The guy pulls out a gun, puts it inside. He goes, it is my turn. I was like, what a knucklehead, man. See a guy like that, an old guy in a suit in this place, like, oh, go ahead, sir. You know, respect your elders. The young people today, especially the millennials, they don't respect their elders like they should. You know, but I've been in some churches, and not mine. My parish, this is the exception to the rule. But I've been in some churches where the ushers act like the Mafia bouncer, like, just, what's up? Hey, good morning. And some people are like, man, that usher is rude. I'm like, no, there's different personality types. And you don't want that outgoing, sanguine, fun guy that wants to talk to everybody, be it an usher, because it would be a mess in there. Imagine, going up in communion. People be bumping into each other if guys like me were in charge of the line. Hey, what's up? You want these serious, stoic guys that can keep things organized. And so this is a example. And my guys are organized and they have that temperament, but they're also filled with the love of God. You can feel when I come in, I feel the love of God from all my ushers. I know a lot of them personally, and you're always happy to see each other and ask, hey, how's the family, whatever. But they know you need to keep it reverent and keep it organized. We are in the house of God. We're not Protestants just going for fellowship and hearing a motivational speaker. We're in the presence of Jesus Christ, his flesh, blood, and full divinity. So you need serious guys. Once everybody's in, sitting down, okay, now it's serious. This is worship. We're about to participate in the sacrifice of the Mass, the source and summit of our faith. So you want serious guys. So my point being is, let's be more understanding, and I'm preaching to myself, and what God's showing me, I'm just sharing, and I think it would be helpful, and when you know the temperaments, it's easier to understand, okay, they're doing this because this is how their brain works. It's opposite of my brain. So they're not seeing this situation the way I'm seeing. So when they're saying something, this is what they're meaning, and I'm misunderstanding it because I have a totally different concept. So let me try and understand what they're saying. And then also give grace, that people say things off the cuff, like Pope Francis used to, Pope Francis and President Trump reminded me early on, like in 2016, I made a video. People were like, "You're crazy," and I gave how Pope Francis and Donald Trump remind of each other. You just say what they mean and mean what they say, and they say it off the cuff, and they offend people. And the left-wing media takes them both out of context, and then the right-wing media would take Pope Francis out of context. But now I notice a lot of the right-wing media taking Trump out of context too, unfortunately. But anyway, the catechism is a great gift to the church. And I think Pope St. John Paul II actually said that. So I'm going to read, I'm going to end this because I got to get ready. I got to get going to work here. But basically, the catechism really tells us precisely on this subject how we should be. Catechism 2478. To avoid rash judgment, everyone should be careful to interpret insofar as possible his neighbor's thoughts, words, and deeds in a favorable way. That's your neighbor. So as brothers and sisters in Christ, we should be even more so. As our spiritual fathers and bishops, and especially the Vicar of Christ, it should be like the ultimate level of doing this. Every good Christian ought to be more ready to give a favorable interpretation to another's statement than to condemn it. But if he cannot do so, let him ask how the other understands it. Like, what do you mean? And if the latter understands it badly, let the former correct him with love. If that does not suffice, let the Christian try all suitable ways to bring the other to correct interpretation so that he may be saved. If you're a Christian, our number one goal is not to prove our argument is right. Our number one goal, that should always be at the tip of our mind, is to save, to bring someone to an encounter with Jesus Christ. Pope St. John Paul II, Pope Benedict, Pope Francis, Pope Leo, they've all said every baptized Catholic is an evangelist. And we all do it different ways. Not everybody has a temperament to just throw up a camera and just say what they feel like they need to say and just let it go with the bloopers and the heavy breathing and the pimples sometimes on my nose from those nose strips at night. Some people, that's not your calling. Some people, it's the way you live your life. I used to think St. Francis said this, and then people's like, no, there's no proof he said this. I don't know who said it, to be honest, at this point. Sometimes scholars change who said it, so I forget who they attribute this quote to, if to any, but the quote, you may have heard it, is always preach the gospel and sometimes use words. You know, loving someone, ministering to someone is the best way to witness, is the best way to evangelize. You know, Jesus said, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was in prison, you visited me. When I was cold, you gave me a blanket. And you'd be like, when did I do that? And he's like, when you did it to the least of these, you did it unto me. And imagine if we seen people like that. If marriages looked at their spouse, if husbands looked at their wives like Jesus, if wives looked at their husbands like Jesus. You know, there's an old saying, you know, that got real popular, what would Jesus do? I said we change this according to the scriptures I just read, the goats and the sheep. We should be saying, what if this was Jesus? What if I was talking to Jesus? How would I talk to him? Imagine how this would change marriages, how it would change families. Imagine if we looked at our neighbor like they were Jesus, how this would change communities, how this would change churches. We could change the world if we just follow the teachings of Jesus and start in your home and just let it spread. And of course, Jesus said, apart from me, you can do nothing. We can't do this if we try, you know, like the virtue signaling liberals, you know, they try, oh, look what I do. And then, you know, you see them, they're the most violent people out there because they're doing it in their own strength. If we do it when we receive the grace of God, when we receive the grace of God in the Eucharist, Lord, help me to be like you. Help me to see my neighbor as it's you. When we receive the grace at confession, confess, I have not been looking at my neighbor like you. I'm looking at you. I have not been feeding people thinking I'm feeding you. Lord, help me be more like you. When we're in adoration, worshiping the Lord, praising the Lord, say, Lord, change me. Help me to see people like they are you. Imagine what we can do. So God bless and stay Catholic.